All right, for our presentation today, I'd like to talk to you about some work we've done with nitrogen fertilizer, cropping systems, and Iowa groundwater. This work's been done by myself, Ron Voss, Matt Schuiteman, and Matt Van Schouwen and Harlan Kruid from the city of Sioux Center. A little background on Sioux Center and its water supply and the issues that they've had with nitrogen in their and nitrates in their water. Sioux Center's water supply is made up comes from two different well fields. There is an east well field with 12 shallow wells, average depth of about 40 feet, provides a little more than half the water for the city. And then a west well field that has deep wells and provides almost half of the water. There's also a water treatment plant then that removes iron and manganese, and the water from both well fields is blended and treated at this treatment plant. The layout, you see it, Sioux Center here, up in northwest Iowa, the west well field west of town, and then east, a couple miles east of town, and the blending station here. The well field itself is right along the banks of the west branch of the Floyd River, and there are about 12 wells scattered about a mile's distance along this stream in northwest Iowa. The water from the east well field has been fairly high in nitrates over the past number of years. If you look at the screen here, you'll see the green line is one of the wells that's highest in nitrate, and shows the nitrate concentration from 2007 to 2014. Orange is one of the lower wells, and the blue is the blend, and that's really what we're most interested in. And you'll notice that the blue blend line spends a lot of time between 5 and 10 parts per million, and then around 2011 it actually went up over 12. And the city at this point, right, as they were noticing these trends, this upward trend, and particularly when it got a bit higher here, it was a bit of concern. 10 parts per million is the maximum contaminant level, and so the city said, hey, we need to start doing something to deal with these high nitrates. So the community sort of got together, and initially, we had some data on nitrate concentration collected by a student from the ag department at Dordt, and collected water from each well and then analyzed it. Historically, it had just been the well field blend. This led to connections with Becky Ortman and the Iowa DNR Source Water Protection Program. And with Becky's help, we formed a community group that was composed of representatives from the city, from Dordt College, farmers, source water protection staff, NRCS folks, and Iowa DNR staff. And this group then got together in probably 2007-08 and began to strategize. And actions, a couple of faculty members, myself and Ron Voss, got involved with Matt Schuiteman and initiated a field experiment, and that's what I'm going to tell you a bit about today. We also installed some test wells with the source water protection folks' help, and continued well monitoring. And we also did some community outreach and hosted some field days. I'm going to focus in this presentation on the field research and tell you about the things that we did to figure out what could be done in terms of managing the landscape, farming practices that might impact water quality. And so myself, Ron Voss, and Matt took the lead on this. And our main question, right, our sort of central question was, can we identify cropping systems that retain nitrogen, prevent it from leaking into the groundwater, and also are workable, profitable, manageable for producers? And we took a look at 5 different cropping systems and ran the research for 5 years. And our cropping systems were continuous corn. In this system, we side dressed nitrogen at the appropriate time and rate, and used cover crops. So we tried to manage continuous corn as best you possibly could. We also had a continuous grass hay treatment. That treatment was basically a control. We didn't apply any nitrogen, and we figured that that should give us low nitrate levels in the soil profile. We also used oat alfalfa corn 3-year rotation, and oat red clover corn. In this case, the oats and red clover are grown in the same year, so it's a 2-year rotation. and a soybean, winter wheat, and corn rotation. So 5 different cropping systems. Our experimental site was actually right next to the west branch of the Floyd River, and a couple of the city's wells are right here. So our experimental site was just to the east of the city's east well field. The plots were set up on a farm scale, and so we used farm scale equipment to do our treatments and our cropping system implementation. So plot dimensions, 60 by 600. We used 4 replications. The yield and input data obviously were recorded for all these plots. Key factor here, our main point of data, was 6-foot deep soil samples that we took every fall after the crops were out. End of October to mid-November, we pulled these 6-foot deep soil samples, divided them into 1-foot increments, and then tested each of those increments for nitrate nitrogen. And that basically tells us how the nitrogen was distributed through the soil profile at the end of the cropping season. So we used 3-point tractor-mounted soil probe, and we could pull 6-foot samples with this, and they were lined with plastic. The stainless steel tube was lined with plastic liner, and then we'd pull that out with the soil in it, and each of our 6-foot or each of our 1-foot sections is seen here taped together. We could divide those then into 1-foot pieces and get the nitrate level from each foot depth. Nitrate nitrogen is heavily impacted by precipitation, and so I want to give you a little sense of the precipitation here, and we'll just go through a couple of years. Turns out we had some years with wet Junes and Julys and dry early in the spring. Other years were fairly dry throughout. 2011, 2012, wet spring, then dry later, and some of the similar. So we've got a range of years here and a bunch of different moisture regimes that we're averaging over. Let's take a look now at our cropping systems and see once what they look like and what they did for us in terms of nitrate nitrogen. So continuous corn, we were planting into a rye cover crop here, and so you can see the corn coming up on the rows there. And a little later on in the year, there would have been a second application of Roundup just after this, and that would have cleaned this field up, and you can see the amount of residue and so on that we had in this continuous corn system. Now taking a look at, this is looking now at residual nitrogen based on soil depth. So we got 1 to 6 foot depths along the sides. Here's sort of the soil surface, and here's 6 feet down. And here's what we saw after our 2009 growing season on our continuous corn plots. We had a lot of nitrogen left over in the top 2 feet, and then a little lower levels here, and then a bit left down at 6 feet as well. As we went through the years, we noticed that this pattern, quite a bit left there, and then less here, and quite a bit in the bottom, repeated itself year after year. So after 5 years data, you can see a lot of residual nitrogen in the top foot, a little less at 2 feet, and then less here, and then sort of a bump out here down at 5 and 6 feet. And overall 5 years, on average, we applied about 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and our average residual was about 140 pounds. And so what's going on here is we had an average residual of 140. We added fertilizer, right? And then the corn took it back down to about 140 again. And we added fertilizer, the corn took it back down to about 140. But on average, about 140 pounds out there at the end of the growing season that could potentially move to groundwater. Continuous grass hay looked like that. And this was our control. We expect low levels, and in fact, we see low levels of nitrate nitrogen in 2009 at all depths. And if we go through all 5 years, we see the same thing, consistently low levels, about 5 pounds in every foot, all through the soil profile. Average, we applied a little bit of nitrogen just because we needed to get phosphorus on these plots. And so there was a little bit of nitrogen with the phosphorus in a couple of years. On average, we applied 5 pounds of nitrogen and had about 27 pounds left over at the end of every growing season, compared to 142 with corn. So now we'll take a look at oats underseeded with red clover. In this case, we got our oat crop on the top, red clover underneath. We harvested the oats off and let the red clover grow. And in this system, we started out with the oats and red clover growing the first year, and pretty low levels of nitrate nitrogen in the fall, all throughout the soil profile. As the next year we went to corn, And as we might expect, quite a bit of leftover nitrogen in the top foot and a little less down here. And as you go through, a little less from the soil profile there. The following year then, we went back to oats and red clover. So we see what happened there. That kind of cleaned up the top and actually cleaned up the nitrogen pretty well through the soil profile. And the next year then would be back to corn. And in this case, actually went 2 years there. The next year, this year was a dry year. We had a lot of nitrogen left in the top and quite a bit left down here as well. And the following year then would be our oats, back to oats and red clover. And we kind of cleaned up the system again. And so it's obvious that this crop rotation can help to reduce nitrate nitrogen levels in the field overall. And we can, in the year when we're growing oats and red clover, we can definitely reduce that nitrate out there. Next rotation, looking at corn, soybeans, corn, winter rye as a 3-year rotation. And this would be early in the growing season. Soybeans coming up in the stubble of the winter rye there. And if we look at the data here, we're going to go through corn, soybean, wheat, corn, soybean, so through 5 years of the rotation. And we'll take a look at how that works out for us. In this case, we're going to see our first year. We had corn out there, and of course, we had quite a bit of nitrogen left in the soil profile after that corn year. Soybeans left a little less out there, although soybeans apparently aren't the best at pulling up this deeper nitrate either. The next year was wheat, and the wheat year reduced, kept, I guess, our soil nitrate at the top, stayed about the same. We're able to pull some of this down a bit, and then we're going to go back to corn, and we'd probably expect to see a bit more nitrogen, and that is in fact the case here. We have quite a bit left after that corn year, particularly in the top foot, and this again was a dry year, and we were not able to pull that out with the corn crop. And the following year was soybeans, and soybeans reduced the nitrate levels in the top foot some, but some of all this here apparently made its way down to here in that next year. And this would then be at risk for making its way into the groundwater. Next rotation is alfalfa. This is oat alfalfa, corn, and this is oats, alfalfa following oats. And we'll take a look at this. So we had corn, oats with alfalfa underseeded, and followed by a year of alfalfa. And if we look at this, we're going to start out with corn, and then we'll follow this through as well. Again, corn, quite a bit of nitrogen left in the soil profile after that first year. Oats, alfalfa, decreased it substantially. The following year is alfalfa, and now we've almost got everything cleaned up, and this bottom is really nice and clean. Really nice to see that response. Then we go back to corn, and as we'd expect, quite a bit of nitrogen left after that next year of corn, and then cleaned up substantially by the oats, alfalfa in the 5th year of that rotation there. We noticed some interesting things as we went through and looked at these systems. One of them was that continuous corn versus corn after alfalfa had some differences. And continuous corn is shown in red, and we can see we've got a lot of nitrogen left there at the end of the growing season. And then it declines, and then sort of you end up with a bit more here down at 5 and 6 feet. Corn after alfalfa, we've got similar amounts in the top, but very little left in these deeper levels. So what's happening is alfalfa is cleaning up the lower part of the soil profile and really providing a potential way by rotating alfalfa in after corn. You could clean up your soil profile and go back to corn, and you might have a pretty good system that's productive and also good for the environment. So just a little summary here. Here's our residual nitrogen in the top 6 feet of soil. So we're adding it all up in November, right, as affected by crop rotation. And this is the 5-year average. So total residual nitrogen pounds per acre out there after continuous corn, 142. Continuous grass hay, much less, 27. Oat, red clover, corn, about 86, so fairly effective. Oat alfalfa corn, quite effective, 67 pounds. And then soybean winter wheat corn, very similar to the oat red clover corn one. And so any one of these is dropping our overall residual nitrogen substantially and has potential apparently. So in summary, rainfall has a large impact on nitrogen in soils. Nitrogen accumulates during dry years, and then it's flushed from the system during wet years. We saw that accumulation in 2011 and the flushing in 2012 oftentimes. More nitrogen remains in the landscape following corn than any other crop that we tested. Most nitrogen is the top 1 to 2 feet and below 4 feet. Longer rotations mean less land in corn in a given year and therefore reduce the overall risk of nitrogen leaching. And our cover crops, timely nitrogen applications, other technologies, site-specific ag, other things, could very well be helpful. And last thing, tap-rooted perennial plants like alfalfa and red clover can really mine that deep nitrogen, pull it back up to the surface, make it available for your annual crops again, and really have some good potential for us. And finally, perennial grasses and other perennial crops work. That's been the standard treatment around wells for years, and clearly very effective. And the more we can incorporate perennials into our cropping systems, probably the better off we're going to be in terms of minimizing the risk of nitrate loss into our groundwater. And with this slide, who knows, maybe in a few years' time we'll see a little more, a few more small grains on the landscape. Thanks for your attention.
Hello, my name is Ron Voss, and I want to talk about the economics related to the cropping system nitrate study that Rob's already mentioned. This is a preliminary study summary, and we'll be doing more in-depth analysis later. I want to explain a little bit the methods that we used when we conducted the economic analysis. Basically, what we did is we did an enterprise analysis. When we did the enterprise analysis, we used annual custom rates as suggested by ISU. We also used the annual closing inventory prices for the products that were produced. We took actual yields of the 4 reps for each plot. And we charged rents that were reflective of Northwest Iowa rates where the study occurred. And we charged an economic cost for the P&K that were removed. Even though this is a study based on nitrogen, there is P&K that's removed by the corn and other crops, and we wanted to include a cost for that, even though it necessarily wasn't added each year. We included the establishment cost for the cover crop. That means not only the seed, but also what it took to get it planted and using drills or whatever. You can find all this information for the ISU rates based on the Ag Decision Maker website that's shown here. So when we do a crop analysis, basically what we do is we take the income, and the income is based on yield times the price, and I've said before, we're using ISU closing prices. We used operating expenses based again on ISU custom rates, the average that it would be for each of the activities. But we also included an opportunity cost that was reflective of money that was tied up prior to harvest. And that varied from year to year, but we used an average of about 6.4%. Fixed expenses, again, were rent. And that varied as the years progressed. So in 2009, we charged $187 per acre in rent. By the time we were at 2013, we were charging $283 per acre for rent. And then if we take the income minus the total expenses, that gives us an economic profit, not an accounting profit, an economic profit, where all opportunity costs have been factored in. Here's an example of what I just described. So we've got income up here. We have our variable costs listed. What I don't show here but is included is the opportunity cost. Here we have our fixed costs for rent, and when we subtract those out, we end up with profit. So of the 5 systems, the first one that I'm going to talk about is continuous corn. And if we look at the average over the 5 years, the average profit was $208 an acre. However, there was quite a range from a negative $161 per acre to a positive $636 per acre. The most profitable year in the continuous corn was 2012. The least profitable was 2013. The continuous hay was the second one that I've got here, and if we look at the average profit, it was $69 per acre. However, that also had quite a range from a negative to a positive. The most profitable year was 2013. The least profitable was 2009. The oat alfalfa corn system, the average profit was $125 per acre. The system range was from a negative 175 to a positive 678. The most profitable year was 2010 corn. The least profitable was 2013 oat. If we look at the oat red clover corn, again, this one showed an average negative profit. The range showed that it was negative sometimes and positive sometimes, but if we take the overall average, it's a negative profit. The most profitable was 2010, and the least profitable was 2013. The last one is the soybean winter wheat corn. If we look at the overall average system profit, it was $306 per acre. The range was always positive. It was the most profitable of this system. The most profitable time was 212 with corn. The least profitable was 2013 with corn. So some observations about this. We want to know whether we can have high profit without high nitrogen losses. That's what we're trying to determine. And if we look at the soybean winter wheat corn system, it had 35% less residual in the top 6 feet of soil than the continuous corn did. It was also the most profitable. It was also the least variable. So it's perhaps an indication that some of these more complex rotations can reduce the risk of nitrogen being lost and still be profitable. Now, our present situation is such that there's a real push to go with continuous corn or corn soybeans rotation. And part of that's convenience, part of it is the farm policy that we have, part of it is crop insurance and the rural culture. They all favor continuous corn or corn and soybeans. Well, we know that Iowa has implemented a nutrient reduction strategy, and perhaps these more complex rotations, as described with the winter wheat, may help the state reach the nitrogen reduction goals that it has set.